Great.
Okay, so what will we talk about?
Well, there's the same issue that we're always talking about, which is the extent of life. And we could get into that a little bit. I'm also curious to know. Let me know. No. Oh, really? Sorry, Corey. Hold on. Sure. Okay. Yeah, I'm also curious to know where you come down in this issue of, pluralism, and pluralism maybe not just in the sense of accepting that different cultures have different ways of representing the world and ways of knowing the world, but that maybe there is a pluralistic dimension to reality itself. Sort of. So the difference here would be one between a sort of pluralism of worldviews or cultural pluralism versus a kind of ontological pluralism. I've been having some debates about these two different kinds of pluralism on my blog and other people's blogs on the internet, and it's gotten me into some really interesting conversations. Do you want to get into that at all?
Sure. Well, yeah. I guess I would say issue? There's a whole bunch of that I would say about all of that. I guess from my own, what would I say there? I think so. Well, okay. Let's go back to some of the issues about where we're maybe in alignment or where we're parting ways. I think it may be partly related to this question of pluralism and of the question of ontological pluralism. I mean, I think we could raise questions of theodicy and to what extent are some people caught in a problem of theodicy because they've smuggled in something like a traditional theism and a monotheism in particular. That is, theodicy becomes a problem once you move from polytheism to monotheism. But really, once you're in the confines of something like a coherent theism that could be elaborated within a dogma, a theology, a scripture that is a kind of revealing. All of those things, those aren't really what I'm talking about. For me, there could be something like a God that is radically other than being, that is radically other than anything conceivable. And what we would have at best is something like feelings and inklings which give us clues, right? I mean, we gain a sense of, I guess, the larger cosmos, but that, to me, that doesn't have any commitment to, again, agency in the world or the world itself. Earlier, we were having this discussion, you and I, when we were talking, I guess this was, wasn't on Skype, but it was a couple days ago, maybe yesterday, and we were talking about this question of agency. Right. And, where does agency begin and where does it end? And, I don't know. I have my sense. I think we both have, a little bit of a different sense, but I think you seem to be placing it in a much wider range than I would. When you're including things like the inorganic realm or stars, to speak of something like a kind of agency there. I guess for me, it doesn't matter if there is or isn't. I would want to say there's orderliness, and there's an orderliness that leads to life. And life has agency, but I don't see the reason why I would need agency at the inorganic. So to that extent, I would say, isn't there a kind of, and I'll stop here. There's a sort of ontological pluralism there, whereas I guess I fear if one says that there has to be agency all the way down, all the way back, it amounts to a kind of monism and a denial of emergence in some way.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess that's a risk that that I take in trying to extend agency below the organic level is falling into a kind of monism. But I think there is a way to preserve a kind of emergence, even if agency or experience of some sort pervades the universe at all levels of its organization. I think there's obviously a major difference between the sort of agency that is at work, at the level of the sort of agency I would claim is at work at the level of, say, galactic organization or the organization of a star and so on. There's a huge gap between that and what a complex animal with a central nervous system is capable of expressing, and certainly what a human being with language is capable of expressing.
Well, even a cell, does a star get irritated? Can it veer off of course because it's ticked off? Can it get frustrated?
Well, I think when you watch a star and the way that it responds to, say, a comet, entering into its atmosphere,
sure,
there's a whole series of feedback loops that the electromagnetic field of the star goes through,
right,
to react and respond, and whether or not that's like whether or not there's some kind of conscious decision making going on, I wouldn't be willing to go that far, but I guess I like to look at cosmology and search for continuity of between these levels of emergence, and rather than thinking of the human being as some sort of a radical break with the rest of the cosmos, I'd want to find some sort of similarity at all of these various levels. Now, it certainly stretches our normal way of thinking and speaking to start applying experience and agency to inanimate beings. But I think the most contemporary astrophysical understanding of the universe is pointing in the direction of a universe that at all levels is composed of self-organizing systems.
I agree, but order and self-organization to me is a very different issue, different phenomena than something like agency. That is, agency to me this is one of the rarest fruits, and it's partly what precipitated, the heightened sense of agency as it conspired with memory and imagination and symbolic forms. It gave birth to religions and religious thought. There's some way nature tampered with the ultimate experiment of localized self-legislation. And so to me, to introduce the notion of agency, I would say if stars had the kind of agency that in any way resembled what we called agency, the cosmos would be a mess, and it would really be an unpredictable place. It wouldn't have any of the orderliness that we recognize as heavenly bodies. They would it would be a chaotic.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to think of how it wouldn't happen. Like life wouldn't have been possible if agency would have been at the level of the inorganic.
Sure. Well, granted, the inorganic world seems to be much more a matter of repetition and habit, so much so that it even can be described as law. That from one perspective from our own perspective, seems eternal, but that. From the newer sort of evolutionary cosmological perspective, we can see that these laws emerge in the course of time. But maybe we can take the opposite approach, trying to play up the agency of these inorganic systems. We could try to sort of soften the agency that we attribute to human beings. Like if we look at crime statistics, any sociological statistics, there's a way in which human behavior at the aggregate level, if not the individual level, at the aggregate level, it seems pretty determined, and we see these patterns play out in human societies that begin to lead to many people will doubt whether human beings actually have the sort of freedom that the liberal, Western, modern Western tradition has attributed to them, and that our agency is in fact far more subdued than we like to think.
Okay, I guess, well, this would be where I want to really get into that discussion. I mean, I think the agency that one has is in discerning what is under one's control and what is not under one's control. And it may well be that to try to reduce people to being just one more example of a scientific object to be talked about and predicted is part of the problem. That is part of what I'm interested in is the difference of what one means by information as one moves from the level of physics to the level of chemistry to biology to the different levels of life, all kinds of levels there, and then what we mean as you move to even human nonverbal displays, to language, to culture. I mean, there's lots of different mathematics. You get to lots of different of what one means by information, sort of broadly. And I think there is there's a real slipperiness that's maybe being introduced that's maybe passing unnoticed. So when I'm talking about agency, I'm partly talking not about self-determination or self-fashioning, but something that begins with irritability of the cell, with capacity to be perturbed, motivated, and it could be a nutrient gradient, it could be a pressure gradient, it could be just a heat sensitivity to the immediate environment, but the range and scope of awareness of space and time, I think, is sort of the concern, in that as people became more capable of thinking about themselves abstractly, again, not necessarily fashioning themselves, but able to deal better and worse with their own guilt, their own determination, their own capacity to forgive, their own capacity to to relate to themselves, relate to others. Those to me are much more of what I'm interested in. Like, I don't know if we can speak of spiritual crises among the inorganic or even in the animal realm. I think, so it's, as much as I want to celebrate the continuities throughout nature, and I do see humans as a product of natural evolution, and I don't think there's anything supernatural or anything like that, I think I can still move toward recognizing some of those features that conspired in nature to make the human experience possible. And it's just to recognize those emergent properties, and how religion, from my perspective, in some way came with those as a kind of artistic authority, as a kind of artistic sanctioning agent for the felt sense of freedom and felt sense of agency. The concern over what it means to be responsible.
Yeah.
Like we were talking about it yesterday, about, to me, the important point about the Bible is that the earliest peoples, they imagined a God who spoke to them and gave covenants and gave promises. And that, to me, is the earliest people trying to describe their own awareness of the difference between talking about things and talking to people, and the kind of management in the new relationship of time that comes when one's able to talk to others and to oneself, rather than just in a space talk about things.
So do you think that for these more primal, traditional cultures, that their ability to enter into a sort of I-thou relationship with the world is a projection of the sociality of their communities onto a universe that isn't actually capable of that kind of response? So are you
I mean, talking about actual Buber's I and Thou book, which I love. I think that's a classic text.
I'm referencing that as alluding to it, but it seems like what you're saying is that there's a way in which kind of more traditional, almost animist societies would be able to enter into the surrounding natural world as if there were non-human agencies at work in that world, rather than in the modern scientific context. We don't think of the world as full of agencies anymore.
That's right. I mean, I think you find in both Buber as well as someone like David Bohm, coming from a very different perspective, a register of the early primitive mind. Again, it's a bad expression. I mean, but the earlier
mind.
The earlier mind was sort of unwilling, uninterested in differentiating where its own experience ended and something like the world independent of that experience begins. I mean, in some way, you really don't ever have to concern yourself with that unless you want to engage in a scientific enterprise.
Right. Well, I guess what I'm wondering is which of these cultural perspectives is a projection? Is it the ancient perspective of an animate universe that's a projection, or is it the modern mechanistic understanding of nature that's a projection?
Oh, well, I think they're both projections.
Okay. So
they're both projections.
What can we say then? What can we say then, in a speculative way, of course, about the nature of the universe that we live within?
Well, we can know for sure that there is consciousness in the cosmos. I mean, we're conscious.
Human beings, right, are conscious. But I mean, isn't that's basically what the modern scientific, sort of in the Cartesian tradition that human beings have souls and nothing else has soul.
No, there's no soul talk. In Descartes' meditation, when he reads it, the only reason he can't doubt his own cogito is because God gives him the ability to have the clearly to say, no, we're not talking about anything like that. Nothing like that.
But
I mean, Descartes really is he's the problem. Part of this comes to do with the history of clocks and the history of mechanized, all kinds of machinery that became the metaphor by which people came to understand the cosmos as lifeless and as, inanimate. And, but to say that the cosmos is animate, I think that, there's a difference between saying that the trees are alive and saying that the river is brimming with life and life comes out of it, and that, in the way that clouds aren't alive, but clouds move and they bring rain and the rain drops down and it's caught in the ebb and flow of life. I mean, to that extent, we could say that stars and photons, the sun is the ultimate epitome of life-giving power. So I don't want to,
right.
In some way, it's right. It's very right-minded to recognize the power, the life-giving power of the radiant sun. But I don't know if we want to say that the sun is, quotes, alive.
What do you think about the sort of, it's almost, you could conceive of it as a re-entry of a kind of reformed animism into science itself through Lovelock and Margulis's Gaia theory. Do you think that in some way, conceiving of the Earth itself as a living system is beginning to sort of approach what the intuitions of these primal traditional societies had about the nature of the universe, but from a less or say a more reflexive point of view, that like Lovelock's not saying that the Earth consciously regulates itself,
right.
But that there is a sort of emergent series of feedback loops that leads to a sort of self-regulation without any conscious pilot behind any of it, but so that we couldn't necessarily pray to the Earth goddess in order to avert climate change or anything, like maybe some traditional peoples might have supposed. But there's still that sense that our lives, our individual lives as human actors, that's embedded within this larger life system and this larger process that and that our agency is totally dependent upon the healthy life process of that larger system.
I think there we're much more on the same page. I think we're tightly aligned. I mean, my first book was really about, you're a place and moment of self-negating Earth. We're Earthlings. I mean, if there is a God, from my perspective, and again, I'm going to grant, I just want to really qualify, Matt, look, I'm happy enough to be wrong about anything I'm saying. I'm happy enough for, all of the positions you've advanced to be, whatever. I'm not trying to speak with any authority. Here's my sense of it.
Sure. It's not even something that we could be right or wrong about, that like one day we'll have a test that could confirm this or not. It's more a matter of interpreting, what we already know.
Right.
It's a difference of interpretation, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, my own sense is that not only if there is any sense of God, not only is God beyond all thought, but will forever be beyond all thought. It's not like we're waiting for thought to get more advanced so as one day we'll be able to figure out the right formula that will demonstrate the existence of God. And I don't think it comes with some future date, some future revealment. It has to do with a certain, I don't know if I want to call it an attitude, but an acceptance of the complexity of life. That, life is not a simple, easy to resolve in one way or the other affair. It is such an ambiguous mix in so many ways. And, any God who would be able to sanctify this would be so beyond anything like a human morality. It's anything almost beyond the morality of life. I mean, it's just it was hard to be even what that sense would be. Not to say that we're without, not to say that we're without resources for a kind of spiritual relation to the earth, a spiritual relation, I guess, to the ultimate cosmos, to each other. To me, you raised the question of prayer, and to ask, the question would be, what is the role of prayer? How does prayer fit into the modern scientific worldview? And, part of it is, I think it's a very personal question, because prayer means different things to different people. But it's, to me, again, goes back to that question of what is a speech practice, which is totally different than talking about something. Like when people are praying, my guess is they're doing something other than just simply giving a statistical fact about people. That they, as existing subjects, are somehow on the line. And, there could be different people. Some people pray for strength. Some people pray for, bad luck to fall on their enemies. Some people pray for a happy lottery ticket. I don't know what the content is, but you can see that it's a kind of action. People are disclosing to themselves without realizing it that people act with speech. So I'm doing Kenneth Burke's wonderful essay called Epilogue Prologue from his book Rhetoric of Religion this coming week in my special topics class. And what Burke would say is this, that in the inorganic realm, it's something like this: commands and obediences happened at the exact same time, like gravity or the salivation of Pavlov's dog. The command and the obedience are identical. But in the human realm, and this is where you get the expanse of it. Now, it begins with life, where a command can be at one time and the obedience can be at another. You start to get to complex systems. But at the human realm, you can have directly the command at one time and the obedience at a radically distant time. And the gap between a command and its obedience becomes its own kind of temporal horizon in which subjectivity resides. And so a person comes to feel themselves as caught in the tensions of their acquiesced to thou shalt nots. And you can look at a culture. Each culture is a series of thou shalt nots, and that's what creates the time in which the subject exists. So a parent says, don't commit adultery. The little kid doesn't even know what sex is yet, doesn't know what adultery is. They're not even close to getting married, and yet they're told not to do this. This is inbuilding of a subjectivity.
So, this notion of command and obedience, it reminds me a lot of the sort of master-slave dialectic in Hegel's phenomenology of spirit, where self-consciousness gradually emerges from this attempts to master the other and so on. And the idea that in the non-human realm, or at least in the inorganic maybe, command and obedience are simultaneous. There's no gap in between for any sort of self-reflection to emerge. It makes me think about the sort of the ontological status of potentiality and actuality, and that is what you're saying, or what Burke is suggesting, that in the, let's say, certainly in the certainly in the inorganic, and maybe even in the non-human altogether, that we're dealing more with a sort of what approaches pure actuality, and that there is no potentiality latent in, say, the way that hydrogen atoms behave in deep space, or even the way that stars orbit in their galaxies, or planets orbit around stars, that there's a sort of that nothing is kind of held in reserve in potential, and that everything is already actualized until you get to the human, where negativity enters into the picture.
Again, Burke would say it's more complicated than that. And in the essay, too, that's a line he keeps having in the essay. It's a dialogue between the Lord and Satan about whether or not the word animal is necessary. And I guess, there is a certain sense in which the word no and the word don't are the predecessors to the is not for Burke. But I think what he would want to do is he'd want to talk about the difference between logical relations and temporal relations, and in particularly the word first, or the word prior. That is, sometimes when we're talking about something being prior, we mean temporally prior or temporally first. But other times we just mean logically, that in principle. And so I think there are some things where when we say that this is first, we just mean that logically it has to come first, not necessarily temporally. And so there's a sense in which there's a logical simultaneity, right, of the command and the obedience.
Right.
I think that an appetite, by the time you get to the level of any organism at all, you're going to have things like appetites and distant desires, which have a kind of command and obedience. At least there's a tether between them. But once you get to the human realm, they can be at radically separate times.
Yeah. I think the way I think about this is, again, on a sort of continuous spectrum, that once you get to the human being, the negative or potential, let's say, enters so much into our experience of the actual that we're able to, in some sense, a future opens up before us, a space of possibilities that's not there for other organisms. But when you go down this spectrum to simpler forms of life, say, there's, let's say, a smaller field of possibilities and less access to potential, but that there's no 0 point here, that even when you go down to the level of atoms, that these atoms still exist in time. They're processes that take a certain amount of time to realize themselves, and that in that time that it takes to realize themselves, there's a little bit of potential there for something new to emerge, and so that it's not just command obedience, like the exchange of blind forces, but that there is even at the quantum level a degree of choice, not not deliberate conscious choice that reflects on, the distant future, but still there's some room for potential to reach into what's already been actualized and to do something different.
Yeah, I guess
I
guess I don't. I don't have that much of a difficulty, I guess, with that. For Burke, he would say he's kind of coming out of Aristotle, and he would say that future or formal. When you look at something like final causes, and the final cause is sometimes assumed to be futural. And what Burke would say is that, no, the final cause is actually a kind of continued present until attained or abandoned. And so I think part of the issue is how atomistic of a now are we going to say the now is? So if I say that it's always the now, well, does the now make room for anything more than itself? And how big of an expanse is the now? Because I think for some people, the now is razor slice. It's very atomistic. Whereas for other people, it's saddlebag, elongated. It's a stretch that includes retentions and protensions. And that elongation really is crucial.
Yeah. No, I think as we move up the scale of complexity in nature, we get what we see happening is an expanded sense of now that includes more of the past and more of the future.
Right.
Whereas when you go down the scale, you approach that instantaneous, point instant, let's say, but that you never actually reach it, and that it's an idealization in physics to talk about a point instant.
Right.
Whereas nature, in reality, seems to there's a time, a temporal dimension that's intrinsic to it, so that anything real takes a certain amount of time to be itself.
Right. I mean, I think there's just so many different ways. I want to go back to the this question about that you really sort of began with this. I'm thinking more about it. I sort of can't give it the shake. About pluralism, and I wonder if there would be alien life that would somehow get discovered, and we'd make contact or whatever that would mean. But they would have a really robust religious community, but a completely different notion of the gods, and say they would be polytheists, and they were convinced, and they would have what they would take to be the ultimate evidence of polytheism, and their technology far surpassed ours. I wonder how quickly polytheism would spread, and I wonder how quickly the problem of evil would just drop right out. That is, evil as a problem only is a problem in monotheism. In polytheism, evil is just a fact that there isn't one all-powerful, all-good God. But once we've created this, there's only one all-good, all-powerful God. It's all these people they're ready to go, they're bitter, they're frustrated, they're angry because there's whatever. Life isn't like they can imagine, or it's not like they want it to be.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily look at polytheism and monotheism as irreconcilable. You look at more Eastern traditions, like in Hinduism, that there are local gods, and then there's an understanding that they're all various faces of Brahman. And it's only in Judaism and Christianity where there's that more iconoclastic attitude that we don't want to worship idols, and we want the one true transcendent God as the only possible God. Like that's a relatively new form of exclusivist religion that in the ancient world wasn't really there. Even though every locality had its own gods, they had these tables and charts that would allow you to translate, the Greek gods into the Egyptian gods, and they recognize that there's a sort of parity here, and each locality was able to take its gods perfectly seriously, while at the same time recognizing that in another place, the gods of that people are just as real, but they're not my God. So there was pluralism is kind of, it's almost as though human beings were more pluralistic in terms of their religious practices thousands of years ago than they are nowadays. We need to
it's
kind of recover
true.
some of that.
Well, I think it's because of the dollar. I mean, in some way, the
Yeah.
dollar is God today, you know.
Sure. But, in terms of, my own theology, I'm very interested in process theology, obviously, but also the notions of a weak God, the God of, like what Caputo talks about, not so that it's no longer an all-powerful God. It's a God that, as Whitehead put it doesn't work through coercive force and can sort of enter into nature and intervene. Rather, a God that works through persuasion and love and beauty and works by luring us, towards more beautiful expressions. And in that context, evil becomes, what Whitehead called. Whitehead said it was evil is creativity in the wrong season. It's creativity that doesn't respect the habits of its habitat and so destroys that habitat. And so that evil doesn't become a force opposed to good. Evil becomes something like, just good, what could be good in some other context, but in the context which it is expressed, is not helpful to its local environment, so to speak.
Right.
So I think there's a need to kind of shift away from these transcendent notions of an all-powerful creator God towards a more immanentist understanding of creativity as it works in the world.
Yeah.
And that it's a kind of a deity that all of the universe participates in. And it's not something to be worshipped as beyond us, but something to be celebrated as here among us.
Yeah. Again, see, this is...
it's kind of pantheistic, but it's not pantheism in the sense that, nature as a whole, as some sort of a finished whole, is God. I don't conceive of nature as some sort of a finished, completed whole. It's an ongoing process. This is where my pluralism comes in, ontologically speaking, that maybe the universe is striving towards a kind of wholeness, but it's not achieved. It hasn't been wrapped up yet, so that we could, once and for all pronounce upon the nature of things. It is now, and for all intents, as far as I can tell, it will continue to be an open-ended process.
Right. I mean, I guess I think I understand. I think we part ways are a little bit here, or there's a little bit of difference there. Is that I guess I see it. It goes back to this question of, is it logically prior or temporally prior? Like, I don't think one needs a God who is temporally prior, but you can conceive of it as in principle or logically prior, and having to do with a certain orderliness presupposed by the manifestation of the physical cosmos. And in there, its orderliness as an energy, it releases, I guess, its potentialities as they can be released in time as it unfolds. And I don't know if how do I get it? I mean, the question of pantheism is difficult because I do want to think that if there is anything resembling a God, whatever that would mean, it would just be so beyond all thought, beyond all experience. Not to say that there aren't inklings and clues to, I guess, the awesomeness of existence within our own, I guess, the experiences that we have, whether they're profound religious experiences, a person can have an altered state, whatever that is. I don't know, though, that, how do I say it, that spirituality or religiosity, for me anyway, I see it as a kind of bouquet out of human imagination, but to say that it's a product of human imagination doesn't mean that it's simply subjective or that it's therefore relegated to a fantasy. No, its imagination is one of the strangest, most interesting fruits of the cosmos.
Sure.
Or at least of this planet that we have discovered. I mean, what imagination is and how it is a kind of knowing. I mean, so much of science is really collective imagination.
Yeah. No, I love the way you put it in your first book that, we are self-negating Earth. The human imagination is self-negating dirt, and that...
Right. I mean, we're naturally transcending in some way.
Right. Yeah. No, I'm a part of me is definitely attuned to that kind of a stoic perspective, a kind of immanent logos that comes to reflect upon itself. I guess I'm drawn to speculative systematic philosophy, not because I think we could arrive at some final account of things, but because as ineffable as beyond as the divine may be, I still think that for the purposes of trying to organize a kind of planetary civilization around a common mythos of some sort, that this sort of speculative cosmology becomes rather urgent. Not that we need some overarching world religion or something. I think that plurality of spiritual expression is part of what a healthy planetary civilization would have, but that underlying all of those various sort of local expressions of the spiritual, there would be some imaginative background or some sort of a metaphysical scheme that, while open-ended, still provided for some sense of comprehensive explanation of the way all the various human endeavors fit together, and the scientific and the artistic can be held in some common understanding, some common imaginative background, and I know that will always be a speculative endeavor, but one of the things that really draws me to that kind of a attempt to systematize is the need for a basis for a new kind of ethics that allows us not only to welcome the entire human community into our ethical purview, which we still have work to do in that respect, but also the rest of the Earth community. I think, until we have, as a human family, a convincing way of talking about and relating to non-human forms of agency, even if we're only talking about other animals and plants and other organisms, I think we're going to continue to fall victim to the default value system of our civilization, which is capitalism, where the only value comes from human beings, and like Locke said, land doesn't have value until it's owned and produced into something to be sold in the marketplace by human beings. And I think we need an alternative sort of Earth ethos that would allow us to recognize the intrinsic value of all the other forms of life that exist on the planet. And it seems to me that part of being able to do that is not only to counter the implicit metaphysics and ontology guiding and supporting capitalism, but constructing something else, as an alternative.
Oh yeah, no, Matt. I think there again we're very much, from my perspective, we're very aligned on all of that. I think, to me, the point of trying to offer up this, we'll call it an imaginative horizon of ultimate alterity for having as an interlocutor for one's ultimate desired world, for one's goal of civilization, for one's what one sees as the betterment of oneself, betterment of humanity. I think it's that sort of idealization that becomes possible, and a lot of it begins with the question of who am I? I think so much of the ethics it's not going to come by way of, and this is where the problem comes back to Burke, so much of it isn't going to be straightened out by more of the same. More of the telling people what to do and what not to do, it's only so effective. What we really need to do is help people to recover a sense of the self that is deeper and larger than the cultural self. That there is a sense in which, we become socialized and we get released out of our organismal installment as we enter culture and enter history. But the dialectic really isn't complete until we recover our roots in the sort of that earthly ground. And I think if you would adequately destabilize the belief in the individual, you adequately sort of reassert the earthly embodied ground of people, the extent to which they're dreamless sleepers who are eating and defecating, who require other people for nourishment and sustenance, all kinds of stuff. At that point, the Maya, all the illusions, they start to wash away, and so many of the ethical issues, problems of greed, all this kind of stuff, it in some way washes. A lot of people are miserable, and they're making other people miserable, largely because they don't know who they really are. And when I say who they really are, I mean an ultimate place of the cosmos. They're a place and moment of it. They're not a thing inside it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, hey, Corey, my battery here is about to die.
Hey, it's good
so maybe
seeing
we should
you,
wrap
Matt.
it up. But
yeah, I was going to say, I don't know how many people have stuck with us here. We've been going at it for about an hour, so.
Yeah. All right. Cool, Corey. Glad we got to do this. And
it was fun.
Let's do it more often.
Okay, sounds good.
Cool, man. All right.
Okay, take care.
Take care of yourself. Stay warm out there.
Okay, you bet. We'll try. Bye-bye.